So you've just watched Spider-Man: Brand New Day, and suddenly everyone is talking about Jean Grey. You've probably already learned that she's one of the most powerful mutants in Marvel history. But then you come across another question online. Does Jean Grey actually have a sister? The answer is yes, but it's a lot more complicated than simply saying she has a sibling. Because Jean Grey's sister has her own fascinating story, her own mutant connections, and her own place in Marvel Comics. And believe it or not, her family has played a much bigger role in the X-Men universe than most fans realize. So let's break it all down. Meet Sara Grey. Jean Grey's older sister is named Sara Grey. Unlike Jean, Sara was born completely human. She never developed mutant powers. No telepathy, no telekinesis, nothing extraordinary, at least on the surface. Growing up, the two sisters shared what seemed like a normal family life with their parents, John and Elaine Grey. But everything changed when Jean's mutant abilities first began to emerge. The moment everything changed. Jean's powers didn't appear gradually. They exploded into existence after witnessing a close friend die in a tragic accident. The emotional trauma triggered her mutant abilities. Suddenly, Jean wasn't just hearing voices, she was feeling another person's final thoughts. For a young child, it was overwhelming. Professor Charles Xavier eventually stepped in to help Jean control her incredible psychic powers. From that moment on, Jean's life would never be ordinary again. Sara watched all of this happen from the sidelines. She loved her sister, but she couldn't truly understand what Jean was becoming. Did Sara ever become a mutant? This is one of the biggest misconceptions online. No, Sara Grey has never been a mutant in Marvel's main comic continuity. She's an ordinary human, and that's actually what makes her character interesting. Through Sara, comic readers get to see what it's like for a normal family trying to understand someone whose powers are beyond imagination. She isn't fighting Sentinels. She isn't joining the X-Men. She's simply trying to protect her family while the world around them becomes increasingly dangerous. Sara's family has mutant connections too. Although Sara herself isn't a mutant, her family eventually becomes deeply connected to the mutant world. She marries Paul Bailey. Together, they have two children, Joey Bailey and Gail Bailey. Because mutant abilities can be inherited genetically, comic readers have often wondered whether Sara's children might eventually develop powers of their own. Marvel has explored different versions of that idea across alternate timelines and stories. But in the primary continuity, Sara's children largely remain ordinary humans. Still, just being related to Jean Grey makes their lives anything but ordinary. A tragic story. Unfortunately, being part of Jean Grey's family comes with enormous risks. Throughout Marvel Comics, Jean's enemies often target the people she loves. Sara and her family have repeatedly found themselves caught in conflicts involving powerful mutants, villains, and cosmic threats. Without giving away every comic storyline, it's fair to say that the Grey family experiences more than its share of heartbreak. It's one of the recurring themes in the X-Men universe. Being close to someone as powerful as Jean Grey can be both a blessing and a terrible burden. Why doesn't the MCU mention Sara? If you've only watched Marvel movies, you might be wondering why you've never heard about Sara Grey. The answer is simple. Previous X-Men films focused almost entirely on Jean herself, her relationship with Professor X, Cyclops, Wolverine, and eventually the Phoenix Force. Her family rarely received much screen time. Now that Marvel Studios is introducing mutants into the MCU, there's an opportunity to explore Jean's personal life much more deeply than previous films ever did. Whether Sara eventually appears remains unknown. But comic readers certainly know she's an important part of Jean's origin. Could Sara appear in future MCU movies? Now that Jean Grey has entered the MCU, Marvel has countless directions they could take. They could keep the focus entirely on the X-Men, or they could spend more time showing Jean's life before she becomes one of Marvel's greatest heroes. Introducing Sara Grey would help audiences understand who Jean was before the powers, before the Phoenix, and before the fate of entire worlds rested on her shoulders. Sometimes, the most emotional superhero stories aren't about saving the universe. They're about family. And Jean Grey's relationship with her sister is a perfect example of that. Hidden detail most fans miss. One detail many people overlook is that Sara represents the life Jean could have had. If Jean had never developed mutant abilities, if Professor X had never found her, if the Phoenix Force had never chosen her, she might have lived an ordinary life alongside her sister. Instead, their paths slowly drift apart as Jean's destiny grows larger than either of them could have imagined. That contrast makes Jean's story even more tragic. Because every time she saves the world, she moves a little further away from the normal life she once had. Why Sara Grey matters more than most fans realize? Now, you might be thinking, if Sara Grey doesn't have mutant powers and she isn't part of the X-Men, why does Marvel Comics spend time introducing her at all? The answer is surprisingly simple. Sara reminds us that before Jean Grey became one of the most powerful beings in the Marvel Universe, she was just someone's little sister. It's easy to look at Jean today and think of the Phoenix Force, cosmic battles, and Omega-level powers. But that's not how her story began. It began in a normal family, with parents who wanted the best for their daughters, and with an older sister who watched Jean's life change forever. In many ways, Sara represents the life Jean never got to have. A quiet life, a normal life, one without world-ending threats or impossible responsibilities. That contrast is what makes Jean Grey such a compelling character. The stronger she becomes, the further she drifts away from the ordinary life she once knew. And every time Marvel brings Sara back into the story, it's a reminder that behind all the incredible powers is still the same girl who grew up in the Grey household. Sometimes it's those small family moments, not the superhero battles, that make a character feel truly human. And that's exactly why Sara Grey continues to matter, even without having a single superpower of her own. Final thoughts. So, does Jean Grey have a sister? Yes, her name is Sara Grey, and while she doesn't possess mutant powers herself, she's an important part of Jean's origin story, and reminds us that even the most powerful heroes come from ordinary families. As Marvel begins introducing mutants into the MCU, there's always the possibility that we'll eventually meet more members of the Grey family. And if that happens, it won't just expand Jean's story, it will make her journey feel even more personal. Because before she became an Omega-level mutant, before she became the Phoenix, Jean Grey was simply a sister. And sometimes, those quieter moments tell us more about a hero than any superpower ever could. If you enjoyed this explanator, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more Spider-Man, X-Men, Jean Grey, and Marvel Comics breakdowns. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.